It's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. Forrest Fenn provided us with that quote of Mark Twain's about a year ago. And, you know, that quote means to me, what it means to me is that, you know, we make a lot of assumptions about things, you know, and we do that quite a bit in this endeavor. And I've talked a lot about that. But it's going to relate to a recent video that came out by another FenTuber that talked about poetry versus grammar. And while I like the video and I like the person who put it together, I wanted to give you what I like to call the flip side of that argument. And to me, you know, the person that put that video out made a good point. And that is that poetry really doesn't have to follow the rules of grammar. And I would wholeheartedly agree with that. And I believe I mentioned that in my What Are the 9 Clues thread, or excuse me, video. And you can go back and watch that. But I had said that, you know, that I believe that the 9 clues are simply the 9 sentences in the poem. And that, you know, all those that you know, will detract to that will say, well, you know, poetry doesn't have to follow the rules of punctuation and grammar. And I would wholeheartedly agree with those people. But again, we're not talking about a standard poem here. We're talking about what should be a literary version of a treasure map. And Forrest Fenn has told us that his poem pretty much is that, you know, a map to the treasure, right? So in my really naive view of poetry, poetry is really, in my opinion, meant to convey feelings or emotions, not really logic. But the purpose of Fenn's poem is to lead us to the end of his rainbow and the treasure, is it not? I mean, is that not what he says in the words just prior to the poem? And that is, you know, so I wrote a poem that if followed precisely will lead to the end of my rainbow and the treasure. So we should know that the purpose of Forrest Fenn's poem is to lead us to the treasure, right? But, you know, one thing has always come up about the poem, and that is that the words halt and walk within the poem don't rhyme. And there's been, you know, people that question that. You know, most recently in the middle school class, who they asked, why don't those words rhyme? Is there a reason for that? And Forrest Fenn responded by saying, yes, I was limited by my ability. And what ability is he talking about? And in my opinion, that ability is for the poem to do its job or to serve its purpose. That purpose being to lead us to the end of his rainbow and the treasure. So now Forrest has told us that, you know, he worked on that poem for 15 years. You know, he worked on it, you know, to getting the words exactly the way he wanted them. And his words exactly were, I knew all along where I wanted to hide the treasure, so I didn't need any information to write the poem. Everything was in my head. It took me a while to get the wording exactly how I wanted it. So he, you know, the words are exactly the way he wanted them, because it took him 15 years to do it, and it took him a while to get the wording exactly the way he wanted it. So really, if the poem was meant to convey feelings and emotion and be poetic, then why don't the words halt and walk rhyme? You know, there's a reason for that. I mean, if he worked on 15 years for it and it was all about poetry, then he would have made those words rhyme. He would have found a way to make those rhyme. So to me, you know, is what is more important? Is poetry and rhyme and passing on or conveying feelings, emotion more important, or is it more important that the poem actually would lead somebody to the end of his rainbow and the treasure. Now, I'm of the opinion that, you know, its main purpose is to, you know, lead us to the treasure, not necessarily poetics. Now, does that, could it be both? Could it be both to convey, you know, emotion and to lead us precisely? Sure. You know, I'm not debating that. I can't prove that, you know, grammar, you know, without a doubt is the key to solving this, and that the poem is not about feelings and emotions. Do I feel it is about grammar? Sure. And I believe I provided a lot of evidence in my other videos to back that up. But let's talk about one thing in the poem that does talk about those words halt and walk. Because I think that, you know, the word halt is very important in the poem. And going into whether that halt be a noun or a verb really relies around the fact that there's no comma before the word and, or before the conjunction and. And Why Must I Go is doing a good job of conveying that to you. And that's something to pay attention to. But let's talk about the line in the poem, not far, but too far to walk. Now, too far to walk really is a metaphor. It cannot be taken, in my opinion, in a literal sense. Because what is too far to walk for me at my age, or for Forrest Fenn at 79, or for you watching this video, depending on your capabilities and age, is completely different. That's not something we can literally say, that a distance that is too far to walk is actually a measurable distance that is equal for each and every one of us. So really it is a metaphor. And I think Forrest Fenn does touch on that in the Moby Dickens video, where he says that, you know, that line is really a metaphor for his entire life. You know, there's a lot of things he's done in his life that he's not so proud of. So to him, it is a metaphor. But he may have, in the preface of Too Far to Walk, really explain to us what that distance could be. And I think a lot of us will agree that we think that distance of too far to walk could be, you know, the river distance of about 10 miles. So that really is kind of a metaphor in there, and may explain a little bit about why the words halt and walk do not rhyme in the poem. But again, I'm trying to explain the flip side of why I feel, you know, grammar is important, and why, you know, poetry is not so much. Because if he had worked on it again for 15 years, getting the wording exactly the way he wanted it, then if it was about poetry, those words would have rhymed. He would have found a way in those 15 years to make those things rhyme. So let's ask the question, then why does Forrest Fenn use a poem? You know, he's told us that, you know, that the poem was written because he needed an avenue to present the 9 clues to help searchers, or to get searchers started on the search. But why a poem? And I talked a little bit about this in my video, is the poem a map to the treasure? In the sense that, you know, he used a poem because he couldn't simply say, hey, start here, go this way, make a right here, go 20 steps, look down, there's the treasure, go spend it wisely, enjoy your life. You know, he couldn't have simply just done that. It would have been way too easy, right? I mean, exactly what Doug Preston kind of said when he first saw, you know, the initial poem, or the initial interpretation of how he could get somebody to the treasure. And Douglas said, oh, that's way too easy. And that was, what, sometime in the 90s, right? So again, he worked on for more years to try and perfect this thing and get it exactly the way he wanted. But again, why a poem? And, you know, I talked a little bit about that in, you know, my, you know, comparing the gold bug to, you know, Forrest Fenn's treasure hunt, is that he needed an avenue. He needed a way to present the clues that wouldn't be so easy for us to initially interpret and walk directly to the poem. So if you've done your homework and you have read the gold bug like I've suggested, you might see some similarities in the fact that we know that Legrand, you know, the character in the gold bug, had found that piece of foolscap, that piece of parchment that, when, you know, it was applied to heat, showed some kind of, you know, cryptic, you know, lettering and stuff that Legrand then interpreted to be some kind of cipher. Well, he deciphered that cipher and it put it into a plain English. But still, once he had it into plain English, he still had to interpret those words in order to understand what, Bessup's castle was. That it wasn't an actual castle, it was actually a rock outcropping that he had to go to. And then he went to that outcropping, he found what then became the Devil's Seat. And then from the Devil's Seat, using the telescope, he was able to find the Death's Head, which then led him, and it just goes on and on. So he, Captain Kidd just didn't put it in plain English, in a couple of sentences saying, start here, go here, look down, there's the X, enjoy the treasure. Captain Kidd had encrypted it in a way that somebody couldn't just easily figure it out. Well, that's why I believe Forrest Fenn has used a poem. He's put it in a poetic format to mask what I believe is the key to decrypting it, which is grammar. And again, I've explained to you why that first sentence that just precedes the poem is so important. Because he said, so I wrote a poem containing 9 clues that, if followed precisely, will lead to the end of my rainbow and the treasure. Again, with that colon. And what is the purpose of the colon? I've talked about that. But to list an item or a series of items. Those series of items being what? The 9 clues. So once you can then realize that potentially grammar is the key to understanding this, then you can, much like Legrand, extrapolate or decrypt the poem into its grammatic structure, which is sentences, and there is 9 of them, and then start breaking that down. And now that's not easy. Even if you, decrypt the grammar and start understanding the words, what they really mean, you still got to then, figure out what it's telling you, and then take those clues and then marry them to a geographical place on a map, just like Legrand had done in the gold bug. Now, I'm not saying that the gold bug is exactly that, but did Forrest Fenn not say that the only stories he read about were treasures hidden by pirates? Again, Treasure Island, the gold bug, those things were very common tales of treasures and pirate, in Forrest Fenn's time. So again, I really like Man Alone. I like his videos. I appreciate what he does, and I'm not by any means trying to disparage his thoughts or beliefs. I'm just giving you what I believe, again, is the flip side of the discussion, a different way of looking at it. Again, none of us can prove we're right or wrong. But again, if Forrest Fenn has said all the information we need to find the treasure is found within the poem, and the poem's purpose is to lead us precisely to the treasure, if you can follow it precisely, then to me, it is quite possible that grammar and understanding punctuation, grammar, word meaning, everything else could be key and to unlocking this whole thing and finding the treasure. And again, I've said I've been working on that for nearly 2 years, so it's not easy, and you still got to put all these things in order. And in my opinion, there's a couple of riddles within that poem, even using grammar, that take a while to really understand. Does that mean I think I'm right? I don't have the treasure yet. I'm still working at it. I'm still, like I said, I live within the ballpark. I step up to the plate as often as I can and swing. And when this thing is found, whether it be me or somebody else, we're not going to be sitting there talking about, how many times somebody struck out. We're going to be talking about how glorious it was when they knocked it out of the park. And so, again, guys, I hope you like this video. If you do, please give it a like. Subscribe if you haven't. And I appreciate your comment and your feedback. And we will catch you all on the flip side.